Executive Director of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. I care about ending the drug war because I'd like to see our prisons empty.
Hi, my name is Brandon Levy. I'm a second-year student at Harvard Law School. I became involved in Students for Sensible Drug Policy when I was an undergraduate at the University of Maryland. I care about ending the drug war. I care about drug policy because I really think it's a social justice issue of our time. As a law student, I've seen just how destructive our policies can be. And
Hello, my name is Raquel Harris, and I'm a political science major at the University of Albany. I care about the war on drugs because it is an issue dear to my heart and one that affects everyone in every single way.
Hi, my name is Matthew Getson. I am a graduate student at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. I care about the war on drugs mostly for personal reasons. I've had family members suffer under both problematic use as well as, I guess, the policies that stem from the drug war. So,
I want to start us out today. Well, first let me tell you a little bit about Students for Sensible Drug Policy. Who knows about SSDP? All right. Students for Sensible Drug Policy is a global network of young people who are committed to ending the war on drugs. They understand that the drug war is more harmful than drugs themselves, but have a lot of different reasons for coming to that conclusion. We're going to talk about some of those reasons today. We have more than 4,000 student members on nearly 300 campuses in 49 states, I believe every U.S. territory or district, and in 12 different countries around the world. We actually just opened our 3 newest international chapters in Pakistan, of all places, and in Costa Rica. So all of these young people, like I said, understand that the war on drugs has failed their generation, your generation, and it's failed my generation as well. The war on drugs has been one of the most pervasive, invasive sets of policies that we have seen over the course of the last 40 years, and it touches literally every part of our lives when we think about those policies that we care about as advocates, as activists, as politically involved humans or not. So I just want to take a moment to illustrate that for everyone in the room. So if you'll bear with me, will you please raise your hand if you know someone who has gone to jail or been arrested for the use of an illicit substance? Whoa. Okay. that is a very high percentage of you. I wonder how many of you were activated by that? How many of you became politically active because of that? A couple of you? SSDPers? All right, very good. How many of you know someone who had trouble getting into college or university because of a drug-related charge? How many of you know someone who has struggled with their relationship with drugs? And let's not forget, there are lots of drugs that we don't think about, right? Pharmaceuticals, alcohol, both count as drugs. This is my drug of choice, and I struggle with my relationship with it. Unfortunately, it's not all that dangerous, except for my heart, perhaps. And how many of you have ever watched a friend or a family member who has overconsumed drugs or alcohol and have hesitated to call for medical assistance because you're afraid of the legal or educational ramifications of making that call? That's a damn shame. How many of you live in communities where resources are being put into arresting and prosecuting people for their drug use that you think could be used better elsewhere? Okay, and how many of you didn't raise your hand for any of those questions? I promise you that whether or not you think that the war on drugs has impacted your life, it has. If you raise your hand for any of those questions, the war on drugs impacts you as a human being because the war on drugs is a war on us. It is fundamentally a war on people. You can't wage a war against drugs. Waging a war against drug users, against communities, and against individuals, whether or not they use drugs. So I very much appreciate you all coming to our panel today to hear about the ways that we are impacted. We're going to be talking about a handful of different ways that the war on drugs impacts us in ways that we might not think about. Brandon's going to talk about education, Raquel is going to talk about mass incarceration, and Matthew is going to talk about immigration and national security. But we can talk about any number of different topics once we get to Q&A a little bit later here in the session. Brandon?
Thank you, Betty. So I just briefly want to talk about the ramifications of an arrest, especially related to education. The other panelists up here will talk about many more of the other ramifications of the war on drugs, as Betty mentioned. But I just want to talk about how an arrest, even as a juvenile, even one that's entirely expunged, that's off a record, can really follow people throughout their life in so many ways, especially related to education. And just before going into that, I want to talk about, we're operating in a world where the vast majority of arrests, really 82, 83, 84% year after year, are for mere possession. They're not for distribution, they're not for manufacturing. So when we're talking about arrests, we're almost always talking about someone who may have had a little marijuana on them, a little bit of another substance on them, and it ends up following them for life. So we just sort of want to quickly go through the many stages of education and just talk about some of the direct and indirect effects of the war on drugs that an arrest really can have. So we'll start from middle school. A study of over 1,000 students showed that any involvement in the criminal justice system, in the juvenile justice system, means there's at least a 4 times chance of never finishing high school. And that's any involvement in middle school, in 6th grade, 7th grade, or 8th grade. Then we go to high school. An ACLU study showed that students arrested at school are at least 3 times more likely to drop out of school and never finish high school in the suburbs. In the inner city, it goes up to 6 times. And I mean, the reasons for this can't necessarily be specifically pinpointed. You know, correlation doesn't always equal causation. The author of the study, the authors of the study, who are all professors at leading schools, said court involvement may put youth in close contact with other delinquent youths who may encourage further delinquency, less attachment to high school, leading to poor educational outcomes. It also attaches a stigma on someone's record, really forever, even if it's expunged, which we'll get into, and really just leaves some people dropping out of school. I mean, and by reducing that likelihood, an arrest strongly correlates with decreased earnings power throughout life, with a higher chance of being incarcerated later in life. There's a huge racial disparity here. Black men who drop out of high school have a 70% chance of going to prison sometime in their lifetime. And the numbers are lower for other racial groups, but still high. And then, I mean, the arrests continue to follow you. Continue to follow someone who's arrested. I mean, even if someone does finish high school with an arrest, getting into college is hugely complicated by an arrest. In 2010, the American Bar Association, the ABA, adopted a resolution sort of recognizing this, calling on colleges to stop asking for information on and denying the opportunity to people who have been arrested. It doesn't seem like this has had an effect, though. Still, over 2/3 of colleges ask for this information. I think anyone here in college probably likely remembers having to check off, were you ever arrested for whatever reason. And I mean, this is all despite no study, literally no evidence at all, showing that allowing people into college that have arrest records increases crime, decreases outcomes. There's really no rational justification for asking for this, but the arrest continues to follow you. Even if someone's arrested and is able to stay in high school, and is able to get into college despite this arrests continue to follow. More than 200,000 students lost federal financial aid because of a past or current drug arrest since the passage of what's called the Souter Amendment in 1998, which was part of the Higher Education Act, pretty much says that you're not eligible for financial aid if you have a drug arrest on your record. Fortunately, it's been rolled back somewhat, but there's still a ton of ramifications that arrest can have, which could lead to a loss of student housing, could lead to a loss of scholarships, can be forced to really just drop out of college. And even if a college lets you stay in, says, all right, you have an arrest on your record, or you have an arrest while you're in college, there are other ramifications as well. I don't know if everyone saw the 60 Minutes special a couple weeks ago. It was pretty well publicized. Often colleges or campus police or other police will say, will put students in dangerous, confidential informant situations as an alternative to having an arrest on their record. And I mean, 60 Minutes, as I said, had something about this. Students are essentially, they're given a choice. You can have an arrest and deal with all those ramifications, or you can be put in a very dangerous situation as a confidential informant, snitch, whatever you want to call it, for the police. And there are a lot of cases of people who are injured or even killed because of this. I mean, after that, let's say you get through that, you have an arrest, it's followed you made it through college, it continues to follow you. I'm in law school now, and I remember doing law school applications, and you have to pretty much detail everything. I mean, I just wrote down one of the schools what the question was. It was, have you ever in your entire life been charged with or arrested for the violation of any law, including traffic laws, misdemeanors, gross misdemeanors, felonies, or the equivalent? You must disclose this requested information, even if the charges were dismissed or you were acquitted, the conviction was stayed or vacated, the record sealed or expunged, or you were told by any authority that you do not need to disclose this information. So you can be arrested when you're 13 years old. You made one mistake as a teenager, as I'm sure we all did, and then you're applying to law school 15 years later, and you're still writing explanations and potentially hurting your chance of getting in. And I know people who have had to deal with it, who may have not had the same law school success stories that other people in our classes do because of an arrest 10 years ago. It's really, it's absolutely insane, the ramifications. And before turning over to Raquel, I was going to say there's no publicly available statistics for the exact decreased level of applicant success, to law school, to college, to anything else because of an arrest record. But given the racially discriminatory nature of the war on drugs, as we'll get into, and given that stops, arrests, charges, convictions, and sentences are carried out in such an incredibly racially biased and disproportionate way, it's really not hard to see how this school-to-prison pipeline perpetuates racial injustice, and maybe one of the reasons that we don't have diversity at many of our schools. We don't have diversity in many of our law schools. So, sort of with that, I want to turn it over to
I'd like to point out one thing that you mentioned, Brandon, before we turn it over to Raquel to talk about racial injustice in policing. And you will note that in the law school application, which Brandon referred to, the question was, have you been arrested or charged? Not have you used drugs, but have you been arrested or charged for the use of drugs? And if you look at any of the available statistics around drug use or misuse, as the case may be, you will find that people of various races and ethnicities use drugs at approximately similar levels. And in fact, African Americans are less likely to use drugs than white Americans generally. But again, the policing is done in such a way that African Americans, Latinos, and others are far more likely to be arrested. This month alone, the most conservative estimates indicate that 4 million college students will use marijuana, and another 4 million will use another drug. But we all know that very few of them will be arrested. By the time you hit 30, half of you will have tried cannabis, but far fewer than that will have been arrested. So it's only impacting, in this particular sense, those who are in fact being arrested, and that is disproportionately Black and brown people.
Thank you, Betty. The issue with mass incarceration. Unfortunately, with less than 5% of the world's population, but nearly 25% of its incarcerated population, the United States imprisons more people than any other nation in the world. To eliminate mass incarceration, one must first eliminate the war on drugs, because this war has left many families of color wounded. A Black child today is less likely to be raised by both parents than a Black child born during slavery. The recent disaggregation of the African American family and communities is due in large part to the mass imprisonment of Black fathers and mothers. The rates of incarceration of women nationally today are 8 times what they were in 1980. The drug war is the new Jim Crow. During the Jim Crow era, one was legally able to discriminate against the basis of race, but during the new Jim Crow era, one is legally able to discriminate on the basis of criminal history. Once labeled a felon, the badge of inferiority remains with you for the rest of your life, relegating you to permanent second-class status. For example, for a first-time offender who pleads guilty to the felony possession of marijuana and manages to avoid prison time by accepting a generous plea deal, may encounter far more severe punishments than in prison. The person may be ineligible for many federally funded health and welfare benefits, food stamps, public housing, and federal education assistance. his driver's license may be automatically suspended, and he may no longer qualify for certain employment professional licenses. If he is convicted of another crime, he may be subject to imprisonment as a repeat offender. He will not be permitted to enlist in the military. If a citizen, he may lose the right to vote. If not, he becomes immediately deportable. Today, discriminating against felons, criminal suspects, and their families is routine among public and private landlords alike. In order to end this, the Ban the Box campaign is dedicated to eliminating discriminating against ex-offenders, which persuaded the San Francisco Board of Supervisors to approve a resolution that's designed to eliminate hiring discrimination against people with criminal records. No one country in the world disenfranchises people who are released from prison in a manner even remotely resembling the United States. In fact, the United Nations Human Rights Committee has charged the U.S. disenfranchisement policies as discriminatory and violate international law. The movement, like the Black Lives Matter activists, released Campaign Zero, a comprehensive platform for curbing police violence and reforming the criminal justice system. The platform does not explicitly call for ending the war on drugs, but the drug war policies and policing techniques that intertwine with policing problems. Campaign Zero calls for decriminalizing marijuana within the context of a broader call for moving away from broken window policing, as well as demanding the end to the mass stop and frisk and racial profiling policies, both impelled in large part by the drug war. It also calls to end policing for profit, whether through issuing tickets for revenue-raising purposes and through another drug war creation, to use a civil asset forfeiture to seize cash and goods for people without committing their own crime. These laws operate collectively to ensure that the vast majority of convicted offenders will never integrate into mainstream white society. This creates second-class or underclass people who are unable to break into the legal economy. Studies have shown that joblessness, not race or black culture, is linked to high rates of violent crime in poor black communities. What we are doing now is a program that is brand new. It's called Law Enforcement Assistance Diversion Program, also known as LEAD, which refers individuals arrested for nonviolent offenses. They are immediately directed to housing and treatment services. LEAD does not require abstinence, and clients cannot be sanctioned for drug use or relapse. Matters like health, employment, and family situation are far more important than the outcome of a drug test. LEAD is a working example of how, even in abstinence of state legislation, cities can craft policies that bypass the criminal justice system and that can benefit public safety and health. Right now, LEAD is only in Seattle, Santa Fe, Mexico, and Albany, New York, but I believe LEAD should be everywhere else too. And now I thought of two men.
Thank you, Raquel. So I kind of want to introduce the idea that the drug war is one that is integral when we start talking about this hot button topic of immigration, and specifically immigration from countries like Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, where those countries are sending more, or the United States is seeing more asylum applicants from those four countries than any other country, where the number being about 120,000 applicants. And then the people who are fleeing those countries illegally and seeking refuge here are doing so oftentimes not because they're looking for work, but because they are fleeing from the violent situations that mostly stem from the drug war and the creation of the black market and the cartels that run those markets. It's interesting to note, I think, that the United States over the past 7 or 8 years has spent more than $2 billion fighting the drug war in Mexico. And so we're taking American taxpayer money and we're fighting a war in Mexico, creating a violent, destructive situation where people have really no other choice but to flee that and seek safety and better futures for their families. Another aspect, I guess, of this whole discussion is the idea of national security, and there are some documents political documents online about the Southwest border protection, where the main topics are counterterrorism and counter-narcotics. So the drug trafficking, how we deal with the cartels and how they affect our national security, being a prime, I guess, spotlight in these national policies. And yet, there's a quote from a Huffington Post article, I'm going to misquote it, but it talks about how we destabilize these regions fighting this war on drugs that's supposed to be, in the United States, but then we create these very volatile situations in these other countries where people are, like I said earlier, forced to flee for the safety of their families and for the safety of themselves. And I think that's where I'll just leave, and maybe we can start more of a conversation here. Yeah.
I'm thrilled to see so many folks joining us today for this discussion. This is truly a bipartisan issue that touches basically any area of concern that I didn't think of when we talk about the stuff that people worry about in America, whether it's the environment or healthcare, crime, poverty, you name it, and drug policy impacts these issues. And again, more often than not in a negative way at this point. So we wanted to make sure to leave ample room for discussion so that you all could ask questions that you have about the drug war, the ways that it impacts campus life or community life, or any other questions that you might have. I see a burning question over here, yeah? Is that you?
Yeah. So I see this as a very hostile environment for anyone who's kind of confused about this, about how this would be good. So I was wondering, with people who know that drugs are against the law, who know drugs are bad, who know that they're going to ruin their lives by taking some of these more extreme drugs, yet they take them anyway, how is it helping anything by not showing that we as a society do not accept people who are willing to, let's say, steal from their employer by ruining their own health, making it that they can't work as well? How do we show, why are we trying to show that we're accepting of that kind of irresponsible behavior?
Sure. Brandon?
I'll just to briefly speak to that, I think drug use is a reality. As Betty mentioned, 50% of the people in this room, perhaps more, will have done an illegal drug by the time we're 30. And it's a reality that cuts across racial, ethnic, demographic lines. And I think, at least to me, I sort of realized drug use is a reality. What's the best way to deal with that reality? Should we deal with that reality in the way we're doing now, which at least is largely contributing to so many overdoses, contributing to so many ruined lives? Or should we try to address the reality and say, okay, drugs might be dangerous, certainly in certain ways drugs are dangerous. What's the best way to prevent this danger? And I think our current policies just aren't preventing the danger, they're only exacerbating it. So I sort of see it as drug use is a reality. I don't want to make a moral judgment on people. I want to make sure that people who are using drugs are safe, are doing it safely, are not dying from overdoses. And our current policies are not doing that. Sort of, I guess, how I respond to that.
Thank you.
I'd also like to make note that drug use problematic drug use in particular, is oftentimes a transitional activity. So if you look at the ways that people use drugs, and if we're talking about more addictive and more impactful drugs like heroin, for example, most people, if given the opportunity in a kind, loving, and non-judgmental manner, are going to be able to move out of that drug use and become that problematic drug use and become, contributing members of society ultimately. But that's going to be a hell of a lot harder if they're dealing with AIDS, the impacts of AIDS, which they might have picked up through sharing needles, because we have made the possession of syringes illegal and have made a lot of other syringe-related stuff illegal. That's going to be a lot more difficult if they have a prison record or an arrest record and they aren't able to rebuild their lives. So the question is, are drug users worthy of human compassion? Are they worthy of human rights? And we believe that, in fact, they are. That is a supportive network is the way that someone deals with a problematic drug use condition, which is a mental health condition or a health condition, not a criminal justice issue. And study after study after study after study has shown that harm reduction activities such as syringe exchanges for injection drug users do not increase the use of drugs in communities, but reduce the transmission of viruses like HIV or hepatitis C by typically about 85%. So we're giving people a second chance. And if we're talking about your peers, especially somewhere like here in New Hampshire or in Vermont or on Staten Island, young people are finding themselves prescribed opioids following an injury at alarming rates. Many of them are developing an addictive relationship with those opioids. And we are seeing an injection drug use crisis in America, especially among young people and especially among our mothers. Those people shouldn't be exposed to things like HIV or Hep C simply because they have a problematic relationship with an opioid.
So, I have, I guess, two things that ideas that I want to present. The first is the stigma that was kind of, I guess, that I heard, I guess, in the question and the way it was asked is, you know, she talked about human compassion, and these people at the end of the day are humans, and so to take that away from them simply because they are using a drug that is stigmatized, because like she said, many people are using drugs. The fact that people are being prescribed opiates at such an alarming rate, but yet, and then we can't look at people, you know, if you're on an opiate, okay, you were prescribed that by a doctor, but if then they transition to heroin, all of a sudden they're dehumanized, like that seems a little bit, I guess, unhuman, or like inhumane to me. And then the second aspect of that is the idea of isolating people. You know, if you take people, you criminalize them, you reduce their opportunities, you take them away from their families, potentially, you know, you put them in an environment which studies have shown, although rat studies, that are destructive, and people will turn to, you know, ways to, I guess, escape that reality that they're in, this isolated reality where what other, I mean, when you're in that position, maybe perhaps the mindset is, what other choice do I have? I don't have a family to go to. I don't have a job opportunity to go to. No, I can't give something to society in a productive way. And maybe that's not like a rational thought in their mind at that point, but I think that's an interesting way to kind of look at that situation.
Okay, I see 3 people who've been holding their hands up for the entire time, so we'll go here, here, then here.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, you're third. Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay, go ahead.
2008, CIA drag coming from Mexico crashed in the desert with 4 tons of cocaine on it. In 2010, a CIA drone coming from Mexico crashed in the desert with 32 pounds of cocaine on it. How are we supposed to have a war on drugs when the government's bringing it in? And what can we do to stop, man?
I'd love to see Maggie talk about that. Maybe make that a
Please.
laundering issue in Florida.
Well, I don't know if I know too much about the money.
So $55.6 million was laundered by a Florida police department. They are currently under investigation. And I don't think that they made any drug arrests, but the Florida Police Department laundered $55.5 million. So that's it, current in the news. Go ahead, Matt.
I mean, the only response I guess I have to that is, you know, it's like a facade war. You know, our government's saying that. I mean, that's what you're telling me, right? Yeah. The government's saying like we can't, like we need to stop these drugs, but we need to stop them at the user, and yet they're in some ways, like you're saying, CIA drones are coming back with tons of cocaine. So who's the provider at that point? You know, how do you stop the users while you're the one providing the drugs? Like,
Afghanistan, man.
Yeah.
The Taliban refused to let them farm poppy. We went in, they're the #1 country in the world exporting poppy, heroin. So
Right.
you're flooding the market and telling us you're fighting a war.
That's
I mean,
right.
that's stupid.
What that really comes down to is that trying to control supply of drugs is oftentimes a completely ineffective way to control drug markets. We have seen effective reductions in drug use through, and like stunning reductions in drug use. Drug use across the board among young people is down right now because we're doing a better job of educating people. And we're doing a better job of prevention and intervention. So drug use is down across the board, but not because we are stopping supply. Supply is as high as ever. It's because we are doing a better job on the demand side.
Education.
That's right.
On education, precisely. How about you in the first?
Hi. What? Gosh, there's a lot of people in here. I'm a college student at BCU, and one of the, I guess, like programs we have is if you get caught like really intoxicated in public or with possession or something like that, you usually spend a night in jail if you're picked up by Richmond police. And then you're on active probation for like 2 years. And if you mess up at all in those 2 years, you can get expelled from college. And then you're not like able to transfer to another college. So basically it's like all over. What's a different program you would suggest to people who are caught with possession or incredibly intoxicated in public instead of those 2 years of academic probation? Like what's a program you would suggest instead for colleges to adapt?
I would say LEAD. Same thing is happening at my university, at the University of Albany. And one of the three, I was surprised to find out, states where LEAD is coming to is Albany. And there's a treatment program. Instead of getting arrested, instead of being put to jail, you would go to treatment. You don't have to abstain from use, because that's not the main goal. The main goal is for you to be healthy, educated, and to be able to go back into society as a normal person without having the ramifications of criminal history and record. Other than LEAD, I guess changing policies on campus, but if it's happening on campus.
So I think an interesting way to look at that is the idea of separating the ideas of drug use and then problematic or drug use or drug abuse or addiction. And obviously that's assessing on a personal, person by person basis. So offering people the resources they need, counseling if that's necessary, or addiction clinics, rehab facilities. But obviously that costs money and that's hard, But I guess offering people the ability to kind of assess where they are, what their relationship with the drug is, and then finding more positive ways, productive ways of moving forward with that person rather than putting them under a microscope and making sure that they are not stepping on any eggshells. I think that's a better way to kind of go about that.
Just real quick, who here has heard of a Good Samaritan policy on your campus or a medical amnesty policy on your campus? There's a few, a lot of SSDPers. So these are actually on a lot of campuses, and pretty much they say if your friend is overdosing or if you're overdosing with drugs, you should call the police. There'll be no penalty really. You won't be put on the 2-year probation. You won't face the chance of dropping out of school. And a lot of colleges have adopted these lately, led in some part by SSDP. And I think looking at drug use in some ways as a potentially a public health issue, not a criminal justice, not juvenile justice, not a college justice issue, really is a much more effective policy. When I was at the University of Maryland, we passed one of these Good Samaritan policies for all drugs and for alcohol, and calls to 911 more than doubled. So I think sort of if people know, okay, I'm a drug user, my friend's a drug user, and just overdose on this, but I don't want to call because they might have the 2-year probation and they might be kicked out of school, really can be incredibly harmful to public health. And I think that Good Samaritan policies are definitely one aspect of how to deal with it.
If you walk out the door today thinking SSDP is insane and those people don't know what they're talking about and I don't care about drug policy, fine. As long as you do 2 things. One of them is find out what your Good Samaritan policy is on campus so that you know, and then tell your friends. Because many of you are going to be in a situation, if not this weekend, then the weekend after, where you're going to come across a friend or an acquaintance who has consumed too much alcohol or another drug, and you're going to need to make a decision about what to do. And you should always call for help. But make sure you know what your Good Samaritan policy is on your campus and what the ramifications are of that call. And I hope you'll be compelled to change it as well. But the other thing that you need to do is make sure that you understand your rights. One of the things that we aren't talking a lot about today is confidential informants on campus. But if you simply Google confidential informants on campus, you're going to find out an awful lot. 60 Minutes did a piece a couple of weeks ago that was fantastically comprehensive, and I very much recommend you just sit down and watch that piece. and if you do find yourself in a police encounter, you need to know what your rights are, and you need to know that you shouldn't make any agreements with police without talking to a trusted adult and an attorney. So I hope that you will spend some time thinking about those two things.
So, Lady Mata from University in Boston. So a lot of people are using drugs and they want help, but however they can't afford it. So why don't we look into other, as a country, look into other examples such as Switzerland or Sweden. So they have a room just like this where heroin users can go in and use heroin with others and see what the effects are, and in that same location can also receive help. But of course, I know with colleges in the Boston area, if you get reported that if you are using drugs, you do get kicked out. But it also leads to this sort of stigma that whoever is using drugs, it's this sort of negative image that they have, so why would you need help? You're undesirable. So then it leads to the other question of, should we just let drugs free? I mean, with prohibition, when they made alcohol illegal, there was a crime rate that increased, and when they completely got rid of that, then it decreased. So why not do that to drugs to decrease the crime rate, decrease the war on drugs, and also decrease the negative stigma so the policing, the racial discrimination that they have on policing can also decrease? Was that too confusing, or should I?
No, that's great. It's a big loaded question full of lots of different things. I think that we should mention the Global Commission report and safe injection facilities. So I don't know if anybody wants to take that or those two in particular.
So I can speak, I guess, to the safe injection maybe more so. I don't have a lot of personal experience with the safe injection facilities, but the idea of compassionate care, and I think goes back to what we were talking about earlier, treating people as human beings, not isolating them from the world and reducing their opportunities, allowing them, like you're saying, these compassionate resources, whether it be needle exchangers or safe injection facilities. I think there's only one in the North America, in Canada. Yeah, there's one in Buffalo too. But I think these are viable options, and we should look toward these countries who have taken them on as models. Whether or not we make tweaks or not, we should definitely consider all options, especially when it comes to compassionate care for these human beings. I lost my train of thought.
That's great, thank you. So one of the great things about a safe injection facility or a needle exchange or any of these programs that are couched under a philosophy called harm reduction, which we haven't really spoken directly about, but the idea is that drugs are harmful, but drug laws are more harmful. When we talk about things like HIV/AIDS and Hep C transmissions and whatnot, in a safe injection facility, there are healthcare professionals available, so you're reducing overdose, you're reducing disease transmission because there are clean needles available. But people who are engaged in those programs are far more likely to seek treatment and support than people who are not. So we actually see better health outcomes for individuals who are engaged in that kind of program. So yes, we absolutely support, as an organization, as a movement, safe injection facilities. Well, we are. I mean, we're working on it, right? There was legislation in Nevada last year for heroin-assisted treatment. Or medication-assisted treatment. So people should have access to methadone and buprenorphine and other drugs that help them manage their opioid addictions, things like that. And there is work in various places to launch SIFs, safe injection facilities. And I think that we're going to see a lot more discussion in that direction as our opioid crisis continues. But for those of you who are interested in the myriad reasons why regulating drugs according to their harms is far more beneficial to society than keeping them illegal, I'd like to refer you to the Global Commission report on drugs. This is a commission of people like Kofi Annan and Richard Branson, who came together with leading scientists, sociologists, and others to produce a report examining the drug problem in the world and making recommendations about how to move forward. in that report, they fundamentally came to the conclusion that regulating drugs according to the harms was far more beneficial, and they lay out a very interesting case for why that is true. How about back here? In the black and white shirt. With your hand, please. Yeah.
Okay, so like I'm sitting here and I'm listening to everything you all are saying, and then I heard your question about legalizing drugs. I have like not a unique, but I have an experience of not drug use, but like the way that drugs will affect your family and affect people around you. So what I'm hearing is safe injection facilities, but I'm also hearing you specifically speak on the AIDS epidemic. That happened in the 80s, but it's still happening now. And me specifically creating an AIDS-free generation is one thing that like I know I need to be a part of. So whereas like we're sitting here and we're talking about this opiate thing, there are a lot of young kids in here that don't necessarily make that connection between injection drug use and the repercussions that come behind it. Yes, overdose is an issue, but we also need to look at the problems that will stem if you do happen to get hepatitis C, chronic hepatitis C, or if you are to get HIV/AIDS. You may be addicted to a drug from injection use, but you also need to take into consideration that you're about to have to start taking other drugs that are going to be able to combat what's happening to your white and red blood cells. So I guess if you could maybe explain that a little bit better to the group, that would maybe characterize the drug use instead of stigmatizing it.
I think she covered it.
Sure. So I'll point out a handful of things here, right? One of them is that injection drug use is the leading cause of AIDS transmission in the United States today. We have more young people injecting drugs than anyone could have anticipated due to the opioid epidemic. And you refer to creating an AIDS-free generation. That's not going to happen while people are sharing needles. It's as simple as that, right? So I think that you're right. This is, when we look at the drug war from a public health perspective, that is one concern that we definitely have. And, I mean, raise your hand if you've never made a mistake or a poor judgment call when it comes to something that you choose to do, right? I mean, we've all screwed up here and there. And maybe, even if you believe that using drugs is a moral failing, do you believe it should be a death sentence? Because if so, please, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Istanbul, Indonesia, thank you, I'm getting all emotional, so I forget. They will happily stand with you and say that drug use is a death penalty worthy offense. But if we don't believe that in this room, then we need to allow people to have access to clean needles. We need to allow them to have access to treatment. You've been very patient over here.
Thank you.
Which one? Well, how about you in the pink first and then the blonde lady first and then we'll have you.
So I have a question that may or may not have already been answered. You guys talk kind of fast.
We get excited.
So is it more beneficial to decriminalize drug use and then make it more of a public health issue?
As opposed to legalizing, or as opposed to making it
not
legal?
making it legal, but just getting rid of the stigma and just making it more of a compassionate public health issue, like they did in Portugal. They completely decriminalized it, and it reduced all of the risks, and people sought more help. So is it more beneficial to do that?
Or to legalize it?
Yeah.
Does anybody want to address that? Matthew, you look like you're
I mean, I'm not sure that there's like I think that's more of the public's decision, right? I mean, I can't tell you legalization is better, decriminalization is better. We've seen neither here in the United States, right? I mean, to some extent, decriminalization of cannabis. But Portugal serves as a good model, certainly. But I would, in my opinion, which that's all this is, I think both should be looked at. I think, the idea of legalization versus decriminalization, surely there is a very, I guess there is a difference. But I feel like the idea of legalization, there's a higher regulation aspect that you can have. You can make sure the quality of things that you're getting. You can, the stigma will go away certainly with legalization as it does with decriminalization. In either case, I think education, scientifically backed education, that is the most crucial aspect for me, regardless of legalization, decriminalization. The real thing for me is making sure you're an informed decision maker in your life, and that includes with what you're putting into your body. Yes.
DOJ doesn't create real rehabilitation inside of the prison system. So we have state and federal prisons. So when we say that we're criminalized or drug use is criminalized, if I get put in jail for using a drug, I'm not being rehabilitated when I'm inside that facility. I'm not getting help. So keeping it criminalized, putting me in prison, the only thing that's going to happen is when I eventually get out, I'm going to go back to using it, or while I'm in prison, I'm going to find a substitute drug.
So we're going to take one more question, and then we're going to talk about pot. So, and then we'll wrap up. So, over here.
Hi.
You told her she could go next.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you.
I mean, this pretty much has to do what you're going to talk about next. But legalization of weed has been like a very common topic. And my real question is, do you think that that will help the arrest records of young black teens on the street, or do you think that that will, in return, just make it worse and force black youth into selling harder drugs and more dangerous drugs because you're taking away their source of income?
Oh, that is a big and tough question. Thank you. Thanks. So there are two pieces of that question, and we can address them somewhat separately. One of them is racial bias in policing of cannabis in particular, and then the other is illicit drug markets in impoverished communities and how that is impacted by or not by the marijuana industry.
Someone should start.
Okay, so what we've seen in terms of policing is that we have dramatically reduced arrest rates in all sorts of places. In Washington, D.C., a majority black city, or I think it's still a majority black city, we have seen arrests for cannabis reduced by 99%. In 2015, I believe 7 or 9 people were arrested for cannabis-related offenses as opposed to thousands. In Colorado, we've seen reductions in arrest rates to the tune of, I think, 6,000 people a month. The problem is, no matter what, racial injustice is persisting because of the way that policing is done. So when we say you can't end police, the drug war isn't going to end police bias, but it is going to, but you can't end bias in policing until you end the drug war. That's what we're talking about. It does reduce arrest rates dramatically. It will eventually help to build up communities because more people are not being introduced to the criminal justice system, but you still have racial bias in policing. Brandon has something to add to that?
Just, to address the second part of the question, I think that's why we can't only focus on marijuana. We can't say, okay, we legalize marijuana here is done, because it's clearly not. And I think once we focus on marijuana, we'll also focus on other drugs. Also, as you were speaking to, focus on the racial disparity in policing of other drugs. As well, I think the only way this is going to work, the only way the drug war will at least really start to end and will end, all these ramifications will stop, is if we really focus on all drugs at once, not only focus on a single one.
And then, I guess, I mentioned this briefly with the, or I guess this goes back to the legalization versus decriminalization aspect. And when you decriminalize something, you aren't creating a legal market for something, right? So the black market remains. And then if we are only decriminalizing drugs, then we're still offering that aspect of income for, underprivileged or black teens who have to resort to this somewhat violent lifestyle to I guess feel like they have a source of income or whatever aspect drives them to that action. So that needs to be brought up in this legalization versus decriminalization discussion as well. The idea of creating a legal market.
So selling drugs is a really shitty job, FYI. It is oftentimes pays less than minimum wage, exposes you to tremendous risk, and does not provide any kind of job security or benefits, right? So a lot of young people who are selling drugs in marginalized communities would be better off working at McDonald's, even though that's a really bad job. So if I'm saying that, that's a big deal. And so creating alternative opportunities for people in communities is a really important piece of the work that we're doing when it comes to ending the drug war. And if you look at the California Marijuana Initiative for 2016 and the Massachusetts Initiative for 2016, you've got some really interesting community reinvestment pieces there generated by the tax revenue from legal marijuana sales. That is a model for us moving forward as a movement, and that is precisely what we need to be thinking about. But the other problem is, when a lot of the regulations are written for various legal marijuana markets, they are explicitly disallowing people with drug-related convictions from working in the legal industry. Now, they say that that's because they want to avoid cartel influence in the industry, but the fact of the matter is, most people who are picked up for selling drugs are not involved in a cartel. Most people are low-level drug sellers who have no idea how to get cartel influence, and if they did, they sure wouldn't be arrested. So we see a lot of complex issues in terms of developing the legal cannabis industry. Thank you all for sticking around. I want to talk about a couple of things really quickly, and then I know that there are some more questions, so we will stick around. We've got a table right outside. Anybody wearing one of these blue pins is an SSDP member. They would be happy to chat with you about your questions. I would be happy to chat with you, and we have the whole day, 3 days in fact, to talk about this. But before I let you go, I do want to say, like I said, we have presence on more than 300 campuses globally. We are probably on your campus, and if we're not, we're happy to help you with that. We are working on marijuana initiatives this year in 6 states, and nothing has ever changed without a student movement. Every single social movement in America has involved young people in their action, and so I hope that you will join us and consider what you can do on your campus to end this war on evil. Thank you very much.